comes and lifts us up and carries us through it. Now, if you think about, for example, the story of Prophet Ayub, didn't he lose everything one by one before it was all given back and more? Yes, for Prophet Ayub, the night was real. And for many of us, it seems like it lasts forever. But Allah does not allow an endless night. In His mercy, He gives us the sun. Yet there's times when we feel like those hardships, they don't end. And maybe some of us have even fallen, so much to such a spiritual low that we feel disconnected from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, disconnected from our Creator. And maybe for some of us, it's so dark that we might not even notice that we've become disconnected from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But like the sun that rises at the end of the night, our dawn has come. In His infinite mercy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent the light of Ramadan to erase the night. He sent the month of the Quran so that He can elevate us and bring us from our isolation to His nearness. And He's given us this blessed month to fill our emptiness and cure our loneliness and end our soul's poverty. He sent us the dawn so that we can find after darkness light. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that it is He who sends blessings on you as He does His angels, so that He might bring you from the depth of darkness into light. And He is full of mercy to the believers. And this is chapter 33, verse 43. And this mercy extends to all who seek it. That's the beauty of Allah's mercy. The beauty of Allah's mercy is He is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, which means, that His mercy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that His mercy, He says, Rahmati wasa'at kulli shay, which means that my mercy expands and encompasses every single thing. Even the most hardened sinner is told to never ever lose hope in Allah's infinite mercy. And to lose hope in Allah's infinite mercy is to limit Allah's mercy. If I think that my sins are too great to be forgiven, then what I'm saying really is that my sins are greater than Allah's mercy. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says in the Quran, say, O my servants who have transgressed against their own souls, despair not of the mercy of Allah, for Allah forgives all sins, for He is oft forgiving, most merciful. SubhanAllah, and this is sometimes the hardest thing to do. See, it's very easy to believe in Allah's mercy when we're doing well, right? When we're at the top of our game in our Deen, and we feel like we're doing okay. We're praying, and we're basically pleased with ourselves. We're pleased with our deeds. It's really easy to look and believe in Allah's mercy. But it's a lot harder to believe and have hope in Allah's mercy when we're not doing so well. When we're maybe at the bottom of our path, or we're not doing so well, and our Deen is kind of, it's struggling, and we feel like we've lost that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's at those times when it's hardest to really, really believe and have hope in the mercy of Allah. But it's at those times when we need it the most. It's at those times when we need to never ever forget that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy is so much greater than any of our sins and all of our sins combined. And Allah is the owner of mercy, and there is no time when the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showered more on us than during the blessed month of Ramadan. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said about Ramadan, its beginning is mercy, its middle is forgiveness, and its ending is liberation from the hellfire. Every moment of Ramadan is a chance to come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever we are now going through in our life, even if it's a direct consequence of our actions, if we're humiliated or we feel low, it's our own sins which have lowered us. And it is only by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we can ever hope to be elevated. If we are consistently unable, for example, to wake up for Fajr, or find it increasingly difficult to stay away from haram, we have to examine this relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And most of all, we should never be deceived. And we should never allow ourselves to think that anything in this world succeeds or fails, or is given or is taken, or is done or is undone without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's only by our connection with Him that we rise or fall in life. And in our relationship with our world, it's only through our relationship with Him that any other relationship is defined. But see, here's the thing. Unlike humanity, our Creator doesn't hold any grudges. So imagine now receiving a clean slate. Imagine having everything that you ever regret doing erased completely. Ramadan is that chance. The Prophet ﷺ said that whoever fasts during Ramadan out of sincere faith and hoping to attain Allah's reward, then all of his past sins will be forgiven. So now, given this unparalleled opportunity, the question is, how can we best take advantage of it? Everything that we do for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is multiplied during Ramadan. And so it's His way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's a time when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showers His mercy on His creation even more. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy is infinite, and during Ramadan it's showered on us even more. And it's an opportunity for us, as we spoke about before the break, to actually have a completely clean slate. The Prophet ﷺ told us that whoever fasts Ramadan with sincere faith and really hoping to get that reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that they can have all of their sins forgiven. And I mean, imagine that. Imagine having it be, to come out of Ramadan clean and completely pure. And subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He does something else for us in order to make it more, easier for us to seek Him and to reach Him and to elevate us, is that He chains the shayateen during Ramadan. So the devils are chained in Ramadan. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's like, those whispers of the shaitan that often, get us, on the wrong track or get us off the right track if we're on it, that is suppressed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chains that. And so He's giving us a greater opportunity to seek His mercy. But one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that in order to really take advantage of Ramadan, there's a couple things that I think we should remember and keep in mind. And one of them is realizing and keeping in mind why it is that we're fasting. A lot of times we fast just as a ritual. It's something that we do because we're supposed to do it, or because everyone else does it, or it's some sort of tradition. And it's important that we understand the true meaning of fasting and the deeper purpose that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about fasting in the Quran. One of the things that we hear a lot, I've heard a lot, and I used to also believe as well, is that when people would ask, why do you fast? And the answer a lot of times that we give, that you hear a lot, is we fast in order to feel what the poor people feel. And while that's a very beautiful consequence of fasting, I wouldn't say that that's the purpose of fasting, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the purpose of fasting in Surah Al-Baqarah, when He says what's translated as, fasting is prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those before you, that you may attain taqwa. So in order to really understand the wisdom and the beauty of fasting, we need to understand taqwa. Taqwa is usually translated as fear of God, but it's more than just fear of God. It's God consciousness. It's really realizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching us, and then trying to protect ourselves from His anger. And really at the core of taqwa is love, because when you really love somebody, that's when you're going to be afraid of making them angry. That's when you're going to be afraid of not having that love returned to you. And it isn't like when I really love someone, my fear of upsetting that person, it's a fear. It's a real fear, right? I'm worried, I'm scared, I'm anxious about that person being upset with me. But what is really motivating that fear, it may have nothing to do with the fact that that person is going to punish me. I don't think that person is going to beat me up or put me in jail or hurt me in some way if I upset them. But it's the fact that because I love them, I don't want them to be angry with me, and I want them to love me in return. And this is, magnified with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that if we really love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will have that as a direct consequence, that fear of displeasing Him. And taqwa is that fear. It's protecting ourselves from His anger and from His punishment. But also, it's again, a lot of that is driven by love, and it should be driven by love. And even if it is not, even if it's simply I am afraid of His punishment, still this is taqwa. The fact that I am conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I am afraid of displeasing Him, and I'm afraid of His anger. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that He prescribes fasting as it was prescribed to those before us, which means that for one, that this is not a new prescription, this is not something new, but rather the people who came before us were also commanded to fast. And that really goes to show how important this practice is, how important this ibadah, this act of worship really is. And the question then is why? What is it that fasting does for the person's soul and the person's relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And the ayah goes on to say what it does. It says that لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, that you may attain or reach taqwa, this state of having consciousness and fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you ask, the natural question would be, what's the connection between staying away from food and drink and fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Well, if you think about it, what is it that keeps you from breaking your fast? Now assume that nobody is watching and you're all alone. What is it that keeps you from sneaking in, some food or water? Really, what is it? If no one else is watching, what is it that's keeping us from breaking our fast? And the answer is that we know that Allah is watching. And so what is that doing? It's breeding that concept and that awareness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching me, and I am building the ability to control my actions. In this case, controlling myself from sneaking in a drink or some food. I'm building my ability to control my action out of what? Out of fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because I know that Allah is watching me, and if I do eat something or drink something, He will be displeased, and that will be a sin in that case. And so we actually in Ramadan, what we're doing, and when we fast, what we're doing is we're restraining the lower part of the self, because it's the lower part of the self that wants to eat and drink, right? And so what we do when we fast is we control the lower part of the self in order to elevate the higher part of the self. So we control the body in order to elevate and feed the soul. So, by starving, in a sense, the nafs, by starving the lower part of the self, we're actually elevating and feeding the soul and the higher part of the self. And it's creating in us a sense of strength. Because if you can control yourself from something which is a natural need, a bodily need, which is to eat and drink, if you can control yourself and control that, that urge, then you can control yourself from sin outside of Ramadan. And so it's almost like the same concept of, if you want to build a muscle, what you do is you lift heavy weights, right? You have to do some struggle in order to build that muscle. And that muscle really, if you think about it, it's taqwa. And so when I restrain myself from food and drink in Ramadan, I'm building that muscle of the ability to restrain my nafs for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So from the beginning, we have to really go into Ramadan understanding why it is that we're fasting and remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another aspect of fasting, which goes back to the issue of taqwa, is that every time that I feel hungry, I remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because, I might go through the rest of my day, a normal day, and not remember Allah once. But when I'm hungry and I think to myself, I'm hungry, I want to eat something. And then I think, well, why is it that I can't eat? Well, the reason I can't eat is because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm doing this for Allah. So it's a constant reminder. And every time I feel hungry and every time I feel thirsty, I'm remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then what am I doing after that? I have a choice. I can either give in to my hunger at that point and eat something, or I can restrain my hunger at that point for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and gain something spiritually, gain that nearness to Allah, gain that higher level of taqwa. And that's through my sacrifice. It's through the fact that I feel hungry, but for the sake of Allah, I'm going to resist that hunger and I'm not going to eat. And so, that's, again, I think at the very, from the very beginning, we need to understand why it is that we fast. And the other thing that I think is very important in order to benefit from Ramadan is that we should not make Ramadan just about hunger and thirst. The Prophet ﷺ, he warns us of this when he says in a hadith, whoever does not give up forged speech and evil actions, Allah is not in need of his leaving his food and drink. The point here is that fasting is not just about being hungry and thirsty. Fasting has a deeper meaning, it has a deeper purpose, and that is to restrain us and to make us, better in character, right? Because if we can restrain ourselves from food and drink, it helps us to restrain ourselves also from the haram. Though if we're, not eating and drinking and yet we're acting, in ways that are displeasing to Allah, then we're really contradicting the whole endeavor, right? Because the whole reason that we're not eating and drinking is for the sake of Allah. We're sacrificing something which is actually normally halal, right? Food and drink is halal, but we're sacrificing something which is normally halal for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it wouldn't make sense for us then to indulge in things which are haram all the time, which are normally haram. So again, it's something to think about. And inshallah, what I want, listeners to do is to, join in the discussion on the chat box. Give me your thoughts. What are some things that you would advise, or what's some, advice that you give of how to really benefit from Ramadan? And, we can inshallah share our own, experiences and our own advice. One other, I think advice and something to keep in mind regarding how to really benefit from Ramadan would be that not to get caught up in, the sort of the traditions of Ramadan. And it's beautiful to invite people and to get together and to eat together. And this is one of the beautiful aspects of Ramadan. But just to keep in mind, that the focus is not what we're eating for iftar. And the focus is not supposed to be, having these very fancy iftars, which we have to spend the entire day in the kitchen cooking. Because again, I feel that, that misses the point. The point of Ramadan is really, in a sense, to detach ourselves from this need for food and drink in order to attach ourselves more fully and focus more fully on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if we're using that time to, just cook in the kitchen all day, then we're not necessarily benefiting fully from that restraining of the nafs. Lastly, we need to, inshallah, really make a plan. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet ﷺ says that إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, that everything is by intention, and that everybody will have what they intend. And so inshallah, if we can go into Ramadan and making a sincere intention, really to have this be a purification and have it be a time for us to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to, refocus our lives and refocus our efforts on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that inshallah we will get what we intend. So, but we have to be very conscious when we do things. So let us, inshallah, make the intention now and in the days coming up to Ramadan, make the sincere intention of what it is that we want from Ramadan, that we want this really to change us, not to just be about, being hungry and thirsty, but rather that this is something that's going to, transform our lives and to really, really, totally reorient us on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to bring us back. And inshallah, we'll talk more about this, as Ramadan, goes, as we go through Ramadan and after. We have to also remember that Ramadan is intended to give us fuel and to refocus us, but it needs to continue after Ramadan. And so we have to make a plan of real, lasting changes. Not just we do things and we're on high during Ramadan, and then after Ramadan is over, we go back to our normal ways, and that will have meant that nothing really changed. Ramadan needs to be a time of change, inshallah, and a time of getting nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that should really be a lasting change. What is displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It's the lower self. And so that self is not chained in Ramadan, but rather that self is what I'm working on restraining in Ramadan. And one of the strongest ways to restrain the nafs is through fasting. And subhanAllah, this is inside Ramadan and outside of Ramadan. Because what I'm doing when I'm fasting is I'm telling my nafs, my lower self, no. I'm saying no to myself, because myself says I'm hungry, right? My nafs, my lower self says I'm hungry and I'm thirsty. And so by fasting, what I'm doing is I'm saying I'm in charge, not you, right? I'm in charge of my lower desires, which include, the desire for food or drink or whatever. I'm actually in charge, and I will, it's a very important statement to make to the nafs that, the nafs is not in charge. I am in charge of my nafs. And so this is part of the purpose of fasting, is to show the nafs who's in charge. So inshallah, this is something to keep in mind, and we'll be having, a longer discussion on that, actually coming up. Inshallah, I can give more details next week. There'll be a podcast, halaqah, which we'll be having a webinar, on Thursday, the 21st. And inshallah, we'll be talking specifically about that topic of controlling and restraining the nafs in preparation for Ramadan, and the connection between the two. But I want to leave you, inshallah, with this image in mind. I want you, inshallah, to imagine for a second that it's raining. In fact, that it's pouring rain. But imagine that what is falling from the sky is not rain, is not water. Imagine that what's falling from the sky is dollar bills. In fact, imagine that it's $100 bills. So imagine you're sitting in your house and all of a sudden it starts raining outside, and it's not raining water, it's raining $100 bills, or make it, some of them are $1,000. Does that exist? If it existed, okay, if it exists, I don't actually know if it does. Imagine that they're thousands. So you're sitting in your house and here it is raining outside. Now the question is, what would you do? Now, I'm guessing that you'd probably go outside and try to catch as much of it as you can. And in fact, your entire neighborhood would be outside trying to catch as much as you can. And in fact, people would be falling all over themselves trying to catch as much money as they can. And they would, in fact, stand outside all night to try to gather as much money as they could. But we would do all of this for money, because money to us is precious, right? But imagine for a moment that it wasn't raining something that had, some price to it. Imagine that it was raining something priceless. Not